I'm Rachel Johnson, co-host of the EduGals podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Time you've been waiting for all week. I know it is. It's gotta be. It's the HiTech Podcast. This is Josh, one of your co-hosts, as we've clarified in many episodes, and joined by my other co-host, the great, the amazing, one might say, I'm trying to forget a alliteration that I can't get to. The networking ninja. That's all I got. I was trying to figure out another N word that would fit with what I was trying to do, and
it just didn't come together. No, I'm William Illingworth. I'm here. I'm also a co-host. We've had this debate as to whether or not we're both not just hosts, but we're both here. We're both participating, so we're co-hosts. Like James Bond,
cohabitating hosts, if you will.
Nope, we're done with that.
Still not acceptable. I thought if
we lived together in college, and I'm done with that.
If I give it a little bit of time, it would be fine. That was my thought. I guess not. So, okay, whatever. I just rhymed a lot in that sentence. I did it again. I'm like Dr. Seuss over here.
Just dropping beats, man.
Yeah,
dropping beats.
It's prepping for the new version of the HiTech Podcast. We've talked about HiTech Podcast After Dark. We're also going to do HiTech Podcast poetry slam, and Will and I will only rhyme the entire episode.
I'll watch. The only thing I'm good at rhyming is nothing.
Let us know on Twitter if you want that to happen. Just go hit us up over on the Twitter sphere. Just throwing it out. Anyway, this week we are joined by another guest. Man, guests just keep coming for the HiTech Podcast.
We love you.
This year.
We love all of you. Thank you.
It is fantastic. And this guest in particular, I had no involvement in bringing. So it's funny that I'm the intro. Surprise. For those who don't get that, Will handles most guest interactions, and by most, it's literally all of them. I've gotten a guest.
You gotta surprise me
in my time.
You gotta surprise me someday, dude. You gotta just show somebody up.
Show somebody, yeah. I know. Hey, listen, I brought a guest or two. Robin. I take ownership of Robin being on the podcast.
Right, I'll give you Robin.
Yeah, that's multiples. And I'm working on it. Tim Shea.
Robin and Tim.
Yeah, Dr. Shea. And I'm gonna own Justin because you don't work with him anymore.
So bollocks on that. Excuse me. Sure, you saw him and you hounded him down, but
yeah.
All right. I'll give you those. I'll give you those three. You can have Justin. I'll take all of the other ones. Those people aside, though, today's guest, David
Patlut. We are super excited for this one. We are talking about with David this episode about e-learning. We're getting into a little bit more of the technical e-learning area. I think this is the first time we've really had someone more from your area, Will, that's in kind of corporate space e-learning. I think during our Instructional Designers React episode, we did have some IDs that were from that area or those spaces, but we haven't done that much. And this is first time we're going to be doing that with David. And I'm super excited about this one, mainly because for those who don't know, Will and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast. We're probably going to be bringing in a little bit more of this here and there into the podcast. We'll still be talking about education traditionally in higher ed and those spaces, but Will and I have some interest in those other areas to incorporate in the learning that's going on there. And I really do believe across all spectrums we can learn from each other. So this is a cool conversation with David where this guy has been everywhere. His timeline is crazy when you guys hear this about where he and the experiences he has had developing content from synchronous to asynchronous stuff. It's really cool. So with that said, you don't need to hear me anymore. You'll hear me, but you'll mostly hear David. And
I can mute him. If just let me know on Twitter, folks, if you want me to mute him for this.
If you want to mute me, that's fine. Anyway, without further ado, David Patlut, let's talk about his life.
All right, we're very thankful that Mr. Patlut has joined. No, I'm joking, David. I just had to roll with that one.
Podcast tip, listeners: if you really want to make your guests feel comfortable, you mispronounce their name on purpose right away.
It's intentional.
That's really, yeah.
Get the laugh, draw them in.
That was a good one. Yeah.
David Patlut is joining us for this episode. David and I met by a wonderful serendipitous moment. We'll get into that in a little bit, but thank you for joining us, David. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of your background. What are you into these days for work? How did you go through education or not? What you got?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, William and Josh. Really appreciate it. So yeah, my background, let's see. This is the spiel I give when I'm interviewing, so I should have it memorized basically at this point, right? My background, I studied computer science at a university. I dropped out after about 2 years of doing that. Some of it was more like financial reasons, because obviously college is expensive and did not want to pay that much money. I went out of state too, which that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I know. And basically after 2 years, I dropped out. At that time, coding boot camps were kind of becoming a thing, or maybe they were a thing, but they were like pretty popular. They're still popular now, but I think that was kind of like the initial boom. So I already knew I wanted to study computer science. I already knew I wanted to go into software engineer. That just seemed like the best financial decision. It was faster, so why not? So I dropped out, attended a boot camp. I went to General Assembly at the time, where their reputation was a little bit better back then. Not so much now, but we could talk about that.
That's another podcast, apparently.
I have plenty of opinions on the boot camp industry. But yeah, so I went to boot camp, studied software engineering, did the 3-4 month thing, became a software engineer for a little while. About like 3-4 years, in a variety of industries. I worked at a bank, at TD Ameritrade, at a furniture company, children's furniture company. I worked.
Didn't know they needed software engineers.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Or that there were just children's furniture companies. That feels like a niche.
It's a very, very small niche. But it was also like at the time I was like, I need a job. This is paying me like decent money, whatever. It was a horrible company. We'll never. Whatever.
It was the children's furniture company boom as well. We all know that was kind of the bubble.
Yeah, joined right at the cusp of it. Yeah. And so and then I also worked for a startup that actually made it on Shark Tank, which is pretty funny.
Whoa, okay.
Shortly after that, though, we did not exist anymore. So that's the
bummer.
You were much closer to Shark Tank than I was, though. So
I didn't go on the show myself, but still being a part of that was pretty interesting.
That's still closer than me. I've just seen the show.
This is awesome. I didn't know any of this.
I did that. And then what did I do? And then after that, after like 4 years about doing software, I was kind of like not really super excited about writing code every day. Some of it might have been just like the companies I worked for, obviously coming from that horrible children's furniture company, and just generally working for a bank. Like none of it was really enticing me to continue my career. And honestly, I wasn't like super strong of a software engineer. I think, well, maybe it was a little bit of imposter syndrome, but like I could tell other people just genuinely liked writing code every day, and I started to compare myself a little bit to that.
Sure.
And so I was thinking like, okay, I have these technical skills, like where do I go other than writing code every day? I thought about like product management, project management, like all those kind of adjacent technical careers where like you still having a technical background is very useful, but not specifically writing code every day. And then I kind of thought about like, I know about the bootcamp industry. Obviously, like they hire software engineers to become teachers. So I was like, this seems fun. Let's go try that. And so just found a boot camp. Yeah, famous last words getting into teaching. So I found a boot camp. It was a small boot camp, doesn't exist anymore, called New York Code and Design Academy. They did like a 3-4 month software engineering boot camp, and I got hired there as an instructor. And that's kind of where I got my introduction to just technical instruction, curriculum design, basically teaching like technical and non-technical audiences to some extent. And those 2 years were the trial by fire when you first become become a teacher to some extent, because it was like, nobody really taught me how to become a teacher. Like I kind of like relied on myself and obviously the people that were there to teach me these skills. But like, if you're just being thrown into a classroom, obviously there might be some natural, like, oh, you're good with people, so you can communicate your ideas pretty well. But like, being a teacher is so much more than that. It's such a vast variety of skills. It's such a spectrum that it was like incredibly difficult my first year. And I had some really tough students that didn't make the experience any better. But, after that trial by fire year, I came out of it on top, I would say, and kind of rolled from there.
Good for you. That's not always as common to come.
Yeah, those were some pretty rough years, just a lot of anxiety and just, I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with students, but it can be very exhausting mentally. And I just had one student in particular that we won't dive too deep into it, but she basically bullied me to some extent. Now, I can admit to some extent that like I wasn't the strongest instructor. Like I only did software engineering for like a couple of years, and like I wasn't a teacher for very long either. She was really tough to deal with. Anyway, that could be a whole other podcast on bad students.
Hey, I love this. We always have offshoots of the podcast growing out.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how I got my introduction into like ed tech. And then I worked at that boot camp, went to another boot camp, which was kind of a higher caliber called Full Stack Academy. They're still around. And then from there, I was just like, after 4 years of being an instructor, kind of already mentioned this, but it's exhausting. And I was just ready for a bit of a better work-life balance. And that's kind of, I already knew about the company Codecademy. Are you guys familiar with Codecademy at all?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So they're kind of like, just for the audience, if you're not familiar, Codecademy is kind of an asynchronous learning platform online where you can learn a variety of technical skills, whether it's like the basics of Python all the way to like building full stack applications or something like that, or data science. And so it was a really good fit because I already had kind of like the technical skills, I had the pedagogical knowledge and a little bit of the curriculum development, and now I was kind of diving a little bit deeper into the curriculum end. And I only recently left that job, but it was a pretty great experience, just like being on a team of almost like 20 people, I think we had at one point, just like building curriculum for consumers. And I kind of mentioned this in the questions when you guys asked me, like, it's just very interesting to join a team that has like, you're building curriculum at scale, right? It's not just one person writing this thing. You have to deal with a variety of challenges when it comes to like 20 people writing on the same platform for a very big audience, right? So that was super, super exciting. And I got to just know about like the world of like consumer B2C education products. And then I left there just a month ago, and now I'm at Astronomer, which is it's a data science. Sorry, not data science. It's a data engineering tool based off of they basically do an enterprise version of an open source software called Apache Airflow. And this whole industry is kind of like, I would label it as customer education. A lot of companies out there have a SaaS product and they basically need to teach people how to use their product. This is kind of, there's another layer to this where it's not just their SaaS product, but it's also an open source software that they need to teach. And so I'm kind of one of the team members of the education team, and I'm going to help build like the academy that we have, build content and certifications. And that's my spiel. That's my spiel.
From dropout to curriculum developer is quite the journey.
It's a book title, and I'm trying to visualize a timeline right now too. Like I'm very.
You can have that title. That's yours, my friend.
Yeah, I'm going to put that on my LinkedIn profile.
From dropout to curriculum designer. I mean, ironically, audience, listeners know that we speak to like higher education, and we've taught, and we've done a lot in this space, but a lot of folks aren't aware of the learning design or instructional designs fields. They're just not aware that it's like a career, and they've become more and more legitimate over the years, right? It started with just people who were curriculum or adjunct or adjacent or whatever. And now it's like, no, I'm a career instructional designer, learning designer. Like that's what I've been doing with my life. And you, like many others, have stumbled into it. Welcome. We welcome you into the fold.
It's been fun.
That's the funny thing about this, right? Is it's like, Will, you and I have talked about this before in the podcast a bit, but like the amount of people that I talk to in this field of like developing curriculum and learning content, especially in this digital sphere and instructional design, that are like, they didn't come from that background at all. Like they just kind of fell into it realizing, oh, I guess this is like a job. Like people do that. I guess people develop the stuff that I've worked on. Or they all think we're IT. You know, that's my favorite. But
that's a very interesting offshoot.
There's like you make content online, but also like
Can you turn this projector on?
Like I don't know how to do this thing in Microsoft Word. Do you know how to? Anyway,
I hope that happens a little bit less nowadays. But yeah, I mean, I guess this was kind of what I was when you guys sent me the questions over. I was kind of alluded to this a little bit like a Wild West for a lot of people because like people were never taught I mean, probably everyone at this point maybe knows like what Bloom's taxonomy is, right? Something like that. But maybe they don't, right? They just kind of like stumble upon, they're just like kind of making it up as they go. And there's never, a lot of people don't know about it as a path, which is kind of interesting that you can, and especially on the technical side, right? You're not just like, you don't have to go write code every day. You can just go teach it and like write curriculum about it, which is an even more niche field than instructional design by itself.
Well, and when you say like most everybody probably knows about Bloom's taxonomy, like a lot of folks don't know that there's taxonomies on taxonomies. Like we did a series in 2002 where we highlighted 5 different ones.
You mean 20, 22? You said 2002.
What did I say?
You said
2002.
We've been first of all, we learned
when I was with a wee lad,
podcast listeners, that the word podcast wasn't used before 2004. So we've been doing this for a while.
You've been doing it.
We were a digital radio show.
Savage. He's my friend and my co-host and my worst enemy. No. In that taxonomy series, we talked about Bloom's, Gagne's, Webb's, Kirkpatrick's, and Fink's, right? That's 5 different taxonomies. And if you're a taxonomy person, you like love one and hate the others. It's usually not like, oh, let me see which ones I want to use today. It's like, I'm a Bloom's person. I'm a Gagne's. It's, there's a whole field of that, right?
You mean like the fact that people have strong opinions?
No, none of them. None of them have strong opinions. Justin, what are you talking about? All of you, Justin. You know what I mean? But like, so you know about Bloom's, and a lot of people learn about Bloom's coming into this industry, right? But like, there's so many options, and Kirkpatrick's is typically actually more popular in corporate because corporate it was developed in that space and L&D and stuff like that. And Kirkpatrick's ties to is intended to tie towards ROI, like what is the return on investment?
Of course, very business-esque.
You as opposed to taxonomies that hope for transformation. Like that immediately happened.
Hey, Josh, wake up, buddy. Wake up. Clapping, wake him up. Now, as we're getting into this, you stumbled in this space. You were developing learning content at Codecademy. You are going to be developing learning content at Astronomer. What's your background in asynchronous learning? Like what? The boot camps were face-to-face, I'm thinking, or maybe like a mix, but like, how'd you get into this asynchronous side of things?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, the boot camps were, at least before the COVID days, were very in-person. And that's I like to refer to those years as the lost years of COVID.
17 years ago.
17 years ago.
May as well be 2002.
And in-person instruction is just a whole different game, but that's kind of how I got introduced to just general technical education. And it's an interesting because there's obviously like when you have asynchronous learning versus in-person learning, in person, you have like almost like immediate feedback, right? You're in the classroom. Like if you get something wrong or you're working with a student, like you can work very quickly to address any learning needs, but that doesn't exist in asynchronous world. So it was an interesting transition going from in-person instruction to asynchronous at Codecademy. And really, I didn't necessarily like pick it. It was just like Codecademy is a cool company. Like, let me go into this space and like learn about it, right? And yeah, there's just Codecademy, and yeah, I mentioned this, like when you have a company that has a product that is learning, they're kind of dedicated to creating these features that are about learning and making you learn better, which is great. Not all companies do that. They're just kind of like, there could be just content machines that are putting things out there. But I think what separated Codecademy to me was like, we're building these like gamification features and things like that that are actually making asynchronous learning better. Because like most asynchronous learning kind of sucks. I don't know if you would agree there, but like, it's just like, you know, and it's not necessarily someone is intentionally making it bad. They just might not know that like, when you have a video for an hour and you're not like engaging the person, or you don't have assessments that follow that content, like just hard to actually make it, you know, effective. Right. So yeah, it's like, I kind of stumbled into it, and it was really cool. And now I'm continuing my growth into like learning about how asynchronous learning works. Specifically, the interesting part that I'll do at my new job is the certification area, which is a little bit more unique towards enterprisey world there. So that's
everyone wants you to certify that you're an expert in their company. You know, like it's a badge of honor, but it's like, it's capital currency, it's marketing. Like, oh, you're a blah blah blah, you're a hero, you're a ranger, you're a whatever, these, you know, tons of different titles. Like, you get this certification.
All of us who were really into Power Rangers were like, we need to label the certificate similarly. You know?
I want to be the Green Ranger, calling it.
Oh man.
And the certification world is also interesting because it's like, who knows what Amazon is doing underneath the hood for these certifications, right? If they're actually building it effectively and actually testing like what you've learned, you know, I'm just using Amazon as an example. I'm not saying like they are doing this, but
right.
Literally anyone can do anything for certification. A company could put out anything they want and say, we'll certify you, here's some questions, right? It's not like it's kind of like this self-proclaimed thing that the company is telling you, but you know, it depends on how much you trust them. Ultimately, the cynical part of me is just like, okay, people just kind of want to put this on their LinkedIn or resume and just kind of move on with their life. The like learning, you know, person inside of me is like, okay, well, that doesn't really matter, because when it comes to it, when they're interviewing and actually doing their job, like those gaps are going to come out, and it doesn't really matter if they're certified, because like you're still going to have to prove that you can actually do the thing. So
right.
I don't know.
It's something that might get you some attention, but it's not going to make the difference if you don't actually understand it. If you don't internalize, it don't mean the difference.
Exactly. And it's a marketing thing for a lot of companies. Like, you know, I'm sure Amazon gains a lot of traction just from like having a certification that people are saying like they're AWS
Google,
certified or whatever.
Microsoft, the certified educator
all
programs.
of them.
Big programs definitely get the traction from the notoriety and where that connects. I want to come back to this topic here for a second, but I'm curious, looking at your experience, because you've been at very different places with very very different like approaches to how they do it. So I'm curious, how has the course development and content development side of things looked at those different places for you? Like, what has it kind of, one place looked a little bit more like you're that one-man shop? I'm imagining the Codecademy, where you had a bigger team, looked different, and their focus was different. How did those differ for you?
Yeah,
kind of working through them.
Yeah, totally. Great question. One-man shop, like that was definitely in the boot camp days. You know, when I was working as an instructor, is very much like, this is your class, build the workshops that you want. And it's nice, like having that flexibility is nice, don't get me wrong, but it's also like, okay, I got to figure this out as I go. It's nice in the sense also that I get to like adjust things depending on the level of my class, because I have a better sense of like who they are as learners, where they're at. So I get to kind of build that content. But like, at Full Stack Academy, like before, so at New York Code and Design Academy, basically just put everything in a drive. Like there's just lesson plans and things like that. Like some of that curriculum was definitely, a lot of that curriculum was created for me, and I'm just kind of following along kind of thing.
Sure.
Every now and again, I'd create my own workshop or whatever. At Full Stack, we also have we had our own like proprietary LMS system. same thing, just like I can create content on the fly, but again, a lot of that content already exists and kind of just do whatever you want as long as students like it. That's the baseline. Does the student like it?
Does it get 5 stars out of 5? And it's good.
And at that point, I know like a little bit of pedagogy, and I understand like I'm not gonna like totally throw out prerequisites out the window and make it super complex, but like stuff like that can happen pretty easily. People would be surprised with someone who's an expert that is like teaching something. So they're both boot camps, kind of like on the fly, figure it out as you go. The curriculum was mostly built at Codecademy, kind of what you were alluding to, like completely different environment, asynchronous learning as a product for the company, like they're selling the product, and a 20-person team, right? So you have to have, anytime you scale past like maybe 2 people, and even I would argue like, as soon as you have a second person, like you have to think about like how are your processes going to scale, right? So like at Codecademy, basically a documented playbook of how we create the curriculum, documented standards that we're like discussing and like deciding like how the curriculum is going to look and feel. That was like our voice and tone was actually something that was like a selling point for our learners. Like we're very, at Codecademy was like very like professor, but you're also kind of like a cheerleader, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and then like the system that we had, in terms of like how we actually created, it was like a mix of like, we definitely use Blooms a lot, because everyone uses Blooms if that's like the first thing they learn. We use Blooms, and we use backwards design. So we're almost always building off of like outcomes that we want the learner to do, and basically create a lesson plan, or not lesson plan, curriculum plan based off those outcomes. And then from there, we actually create those modules. But like, that's the surface of it. Like we would work with, like we would have partnership courses. One of the courses that I built was like in partnership with MongoDB, like the company, and they've actually collaborated with us on the content and like how it should be like formatted, and like what we should teach, and we'd get like SMEs from them. It was a really, really cool experience. So much more, very, very learning focused. The team, I would say, was the most motivated to like make sure we're teaching people the right thing, the right way, making sure it's scalable. Like it was a very beautiful experience, I would say. That's how I'd summarize it.
I'm only gaining respect for both Codecademy and what you're speaking to in like this field, because what I've experienced, I helped some faculty when I was in higher education teach computer science courses. Mm-hmm. And besides that, my experience is that folks just fall into it or they take a degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
exactly. The two paths.
I started coding in my basement, or I went to college and got a degree and still, ended up doing it. But like, it's not a huge space for pedagogy. That's the point I'm sneaking up to, right? Like a lot of folks who become engineers have not really been taught, or if they've been taught, it was like, try these exercises. You need to know how HTML came to be, or why computers, why hard drives work, like some very, very technical, if you will, historical knowledge to set up the foundation for what they're going to do in their work. But it's not a pedagogy for first or forward field.
Yeah.
If you even have people who want to go into maths, they know they need to take years and years of math education. If you have people who want to become engineers, they know they need to take so much engineering stuff, maybe even get a master's degree. And that's where these, 4+2s or 4+1 programs come. Like, there's so much around a lot of fields where it's like, oh yeah, we have to get education. Then you're like, no, I dropped out. I figured it out. And
figured it out as I went.
Made pretty good money. But your team was bringing that focus of like, no, we need to help the next generation do this quicker, more effectively. I'm so adjacent that I'm gonna like throw some words out, and if I'm wrong, just correct me. It's totally fine,
no,
right?
please.
But if you're talking about doing sort of like app design, website design, if it's something that needs to be at scale, something more than a mom and pop pizza shop's website, right? Like, you need information architecture. The entire thing needs to be built in a certain way that it's going to be effective. It's going to run quickly. It's going to run smoothly. Like, I don't think people understand when Facebook has, I don't know, like 1 billion users, that means that just the login page has to work without
very
fail,
efficiently. Yeah.
For 1 billion people to log in and out of the platform. Like you just take it for anyone who doesn't understand code takes that for granted. But
absolutely,
that's where like you could teach folks, this is how, I don't know, this is how logging into a platform works.
Yeah.
These are the things we need to be able to scale, right? To take more than 1,000 users, 10,000 users, 5 million users, right? And you can teach people that, whereas you would have maybe had to figure that out the hard way when you made a website and people couldn't log in someday because it hit, sort of usage limits, or you didn't have enough room in the database for as many rows of people as needed to be in there. Like, that's the stuff that, like, now your industry is coming so much more into an academic sense that we can teach that,
absolutely.
Get people ahead of those curves. It wasn't too far off. I didn't use a lot.
How accurate was Will in his description of the knowledge you needed?
on a 5-star rating.
Yeah, I think that's like, that's you brought up like a high level point. Like to actually become an engineer, it takes a lot of work, and like you need to know a lot of stuff. And the opportunity of like, one of the advantages of Codecademy is like you are coming to this place where you trust that like the people that are teaching you asynchronously actually A, know their shit, and B, are teaching you in a way that is like effective, that's going to like hopefully get you a job. Because a lot of people that came to Codecademy were career switchers. And they're like, so one of the products we offered was, what's it called? Not a learning path, but like, career path, right? Obviously. And like, it was a very structured approach. Like, you want to become a backend engineer? Here's the modules you need to take. This is the specific order. And that was like a really big hit for Codecademy. Is like, people are coming to us to not just learn, but hopefully change their lives. And that's definitely one of the reasons that I enjoyed working at Codecademy. Was one would hope I was having an impact on the lives of individuals. Yeah, of course, and that's kind of the same reason I got into teaching in the first place, right? Is like, I really enjoyed that one-to-one connection. That's something I definitely lost when I transitioned from in-person to asynchronous. And that's maybe something that not a lot of people talk about, is like in-person, like you create this bond, you're really talking and getting to know that person. Whereas asynchronous is, they're just some laptop, in, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a random place, India, that's like taking your content, right? And actually, funny enough, at Codecademy, I think a lot of people felt they wish they were a bit more connected to the learner and wanted to do like live streams where they're actually like working with learners. So yeah, I have massive respect for every single person that is either still working at Codecademy or has worked at Codecademy. They deeply, deeply cared about the learner. And that's definitely one of the best experiences I had, being surrounded by people like that. Cause I don't think you would get that everywhere.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
I mean, there's a lot of money in that field, right? If more people can get through the door, the better.
Thankfully.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or I might not be here, but
exactly.
I mean, it's a well-paying field. Like, people that want to get into technical education, like, you're going to make good money if you have the skills from both. And it's a hard field to get into. Like, you have to both have the technical skills and the pedagogical skills, depending on like whether you're in person or asynchronous. Like, yeah, that's a whole thing you can decide. But like, it's a good field, and it's very rewarding. At least that's what I feel.
Yeah, I find you get to do a lot of like, it's in this field. It's interesting, the different knowledge bases and spectrums that you get doing it. Like, being able to be in a place where, like, now, like, I'm in a situation where I came into mine, and it's interesting, David. My situation, not exactly the same. Look, we're not coding. We're not building Codecademy stuff, but we do have to build. Like, Will knows this. I've talked about it on the podcast before. We have to build fully online courses at scale. It's not like we're not just building for each instructor. Like, we're producing. My team produced over 100 courses over the last like year, give or take, which sucked. But that's a whole different story. When you're at scale, like, it's interesting at scale. Like, doing that, I've had to, over the last several years, get similar types of things. Like, I'm getting more knowledge in pedagogy and the technology side of things, and even project management to a certain degree, right? In what you're doing. It's an interesting field where you have a lot of crossover to different areas that people, I think, take for granted in those spaces. I know we've dealt with that before, even in those conversations, not realizing how much work it actually takes to get a learning experience, whether it's a face-to-face one or a digital one. out and functional and running well. Like that's not something that just
Yeah,
happens
it's hard
overnight. Some people do it overnight and it's obvious.
Some people think it happens overnight, but it does not, unfortunately. I wish it could happen overnight. I would like if an AI could like build my, and like, yeah, AIs can build like a little outline, but it's not to the point where like they can actually build the course for you. Otherwise we might be out of jobs eventually, but you know, thankfully we're not there yet.
Maybe one day.
That's the wonderful thing about this field. Like part of why, David, I was very interested in having you on the podcast is like a lot of times we get into these conversations that are very pedagogy or very like trendy issue in higher education or but like we haven't really we've spent one or two episodes talking with instructional designers, but like this is something like I'm in this field now too, David, right? I'm out of higher education. I'm in your field. I'm not necessarily building customer education content, but I am doing a lot of e-learning content and stuff for internal development. It's tricky. In a world where I have helped faculty make courses and content for marketing, theology, languages, ballroom dancing, Tai Chi, engineering, electrical engineering. I'm like, in a world where you can touch all those subjects, we have some of the most fun. You've been privileged in a sense to just stay in your field, but I can only imagine your field has, no one knows that Java is different from Python, is different from, like, no one knows that. And you just start rattling off coding languages to people outside of your world. And they're like, oh, cool. Yeah, but like, it's a language. Each is a language.
Exactly.
It's
like French, German, and Italian. You know, you're going to learn a couple words that are similar, but they're still different languages.
Or some might react and go, well, yeah, duh. One's a coffee, the other's a snake. They're very different. They're very different
You'd be surprised that happens pretty often. But I think, I mean, obviously when I was interviewing for my role, the field that you're in, Will, it was also very interesting to me, just part of that whole like learning and development enterprise world. Like that's probably a field that I will want to explore at some point in my career as well, because like it's like I'm gonna basically, if I do eventually get there, I would have touched like the three kind of sectors of, I don't know, e-learning. One, which is like the consumer business B2C products, which is like Codecademy, Coursera. Customer SaaS education, which is where I'm in now, and then kind of the internal training, which is what I was interviewing for.
I kept forgetting to kind of bring this up around, but David and I met because he was interviewing to join my company. Didn't work out, not because of David necessarily, but
sadly,
David and I got to meet each other, and it's been a great, I think, friendship here, just keeping up, and it's really cool. Like this is to me the power of networking. This is why I've been given the title Networking Ninja. Try and make the most of it. Meet as many cool people as I can. You know, Josh, have you met David? David, have you met Josh? These two cool people. You just need to meet.
This is the moment that Will wishes he could do memes in like real life and a Ted Lasso meme. You just met a cool person.
Pop up on screen.
You
just met a cool person.
Real quick, I want to go off. I'm going to go off script a little bit on this episode, David, because I feel like I've got an opportunity to ask someone in this world to give me a hot take on something. So we may edit these out depending on what happens, right? So, Will and I have talked a little bit on the podcast. We have an episode that released a little bit ago called "Higher Ed is Dying," or "Is Higher Ed Dying?" was the question. We didn't make a declaration, but we were asking the question. And right now I'm noticing a lot in higher ed, this push to do more boot camps and certificate things happening. Kind of taking a look. I'm curious your take, because you talked a little bit about your opinion of boot camps and even some of the certificate stuff. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on people in higher ed wanting to do more of that, like going into the certificate or boot camps? If you could give your advice to those people, I'm curious.
Give my advice. I don't know if I'm fully qualified for that, but yeah, it's definitely. I think about my experience in higher ed, like going to university, and I just never really saw the value of doing those 4 years. There is value in it. I'm not saying like getting your degree is the worst thing you could do with your money or something like that. Like, especially if you're going into a field that like you need a degree, like medicine, right? Like you're not going to become a doctor if you don't.
Please do it. Yes.
Yeah, please do it.
Be a doctor.
There are
I think a medicine boot camp would be good. Just a day. Be like, here's
Yeah, that would be.
Here's 5 minutes on surgery. Here's a scalpel.
Yeah. That's
that will do
sutures.
sutures.
Just don't hit that. Just move on from that.
So there are some fields where it's like, yeah, like a lot of education is needed and warranted for what you're trying to do. I think for tech in particular, it's not necessarily. I think that time has passed. Like, I don't think people need to get a computer science degree. They might have a better chance of a job if they do. But yeah, I think in terms of so one is like, I personally never saw like a full the value of a 4-year education, and that might just be because I don't know, my experience. I'm sure people who have taken computer science degree might disagree, and that's totally fine. And then 2, in terms of like higher ed transitioning into like doing boot camps and I don't know, workshops. I don't know what they do, but I'm assuming boot camps at least, or like maybe more asynchronous programs online and things like that. Like, I think it's what that space needed to evolve. Like, I think they were going to get priced out, but also just lose a lot of enrollment if they didn't get into that space. So I think from a business decision, yeah, like if I'm on the board of a college and I'm like not getting in this space, I'm basically losing out on money. I'm losing out on students, right? So to offer like people, and especially since COVID, like people want flexibility. I want to be able to take a program whenever I want to take it, right? Whether I'm at home or in some other country or something like that. Like, I think that stuff is really good. I'm sure the downside of it is like they tried to get into it too fast and aren't doing it very well. Maybe that has changed since it's been a couple of years and like they're finally figuring it out. An interesting company in the space that I think does it sort of well and kind of builds into like asynchronous learning a lot is Coursera. I'm assuming you guys are familiar with Coursera.
Yeah,
like, yeah, I think their model is very interesting because they work with the university to decide like what are the actual things that they need to build to like stay competitive and like keep students. And then I think they don't help them build the curriculum, I think. So that's still kind of like that ownership is still on the university, but yeah, they definitely help to get universities into the space. So yeah, I think to summarize, it's a necessary evolution for universities because I think they're losing out on students. I think enrollment was like at maybe not an all-time low, but I think it's been declining for some time now. If I remember reading articles at some point. Well,
I think there's an interesting comparison here, and I'll build the metaphor and we'll see if it breaks down or not. If you're Coca-Cola and your biggest competitor Pepsi, hey, come on, give me a second. Pepsi comes out
we're getting there.
Yeah,
it comes out with this new, black licorice flavor. Okay, we can all look at black licorice flavor and be like, you sure? But Coke has got to deliver a black licorice flavor. Pepsi just did it. Like, you got to do it. You got to see like, now I don't think either's going to win in the case of black licorice as a flavor for a soda.
That was an interesting choice. Yeah.
That's
the metaphor stands. Like, are certifications the end all be all? Is it going to be? But like Pepsi's like, oh, let's give it a try. Maybe they're trying to stoke Coca-Cola into making a mistake with them, or maybe there's something that they're both going. But like, it's one of those things. You've got these big competitors. You just have to, if they're doing it, they're making money on it. We need to try and make money on it too. If we don't, we're going to lose that market. I think it's why MOOCs won. Not one. That's the very wrong word for MOOCs.
I was like, wait.
I think that's
what industry are you in a part of?
I think that's why MOOCs. I think that's why everyone tried so hard at MOOCs, right? And honestly, it's almost like an MLM, right? You're familiar with the what the heck does MLM even mean? Like, like Mary Kay and these things where people you sell up. Like, someone got a MOOC that got 1 million people in it. Oh my gosh, MOOCs are the next thing. So we all tried it, and every other MOOC got like 100,000, and then suddenly 10,000, and then like somebody got. I remember we were trying to make MOOCs at my institution. Hello, Kitty. What's our kitty's name? This is a fun little guest.
Sophie.
Hi, Sophie. That's gonna be a screenshot.
She has lost all her teeth. She just had dental surgery.
Oh, poor Sophie.
Yeah, she doesn't have any teeth left. But anyway,
at my first institution, like we were. This is 2014. about 14 years late on the MOOC train. We wanted to make MOOCs, and we're like, let's get them out there. And maybe we got 30 people. You know what I mean? Like from the first most successful MOOCs down to like ours that were getting 30 people. Like, yeah, you had to try them though, because you could have gotten 1 million. You could have gotten 1 million.
Like one could say it was like a metaphor, you know, like if Pepsi came out with a, you know, I don't know.
Savage.
I was gonna try to continue the metaphor.
It's hilarious.
Very much wants to eat this microphone.
That's good for
her. I
Yeah.
think there's all like, it's all. I'll go back to my word of Wild West. Like, there's just so much content now out there for so many different things. That was like, this isn't so much in particular to higher ed, but like, you could really take a course on anything nowadays. Like, really can. Yeah. And I think
a YouTube channel.
It's good.
It's a course or a YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. It's good, but there's like the quality control is like hard to judge, right? Yeah. Like everyone's basically like based off marketing. But I think like when we think like I forget, was it Udemy or Udacity? I think it was Udemy is the marketplace, right, where you buy a course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, what was their completion? I think I saw like many years ago, their completion rate was like very, very low. Like people just bought these like $2 courses and just never finished them, right? Yeah. And they're basically they got sued recently too for like their marketing of like everything is on discount every time you look on the page. So it's like, yeah, I really love the flexibility that asynchronous learning has brought, and there's a lot of content out there, so you really could learn anything that you want. And that opens up, especially in tech, that opens up many, many doors for people who do want to change careers. But it's also just like kind of the Wild West where you just don't know what you're buying until you buy it and try it kind of thing, which is dangerous. And it's hard. Like, we don't have a governing body to tell us like, you know, these are the standards that you have to follow, which is like good and bad. I mean, like that's a whole other, that could be a whole other podcast.
We always take notes. We always take notes. All right. But, let's, this has been awesome. Thank you. This is the hard transition. Usually I try and make a joke about our transitions, but it's just not going to work today. Yeah. You brought to my attention a tool, kind of an edtech or edtech adjacent tool that could be useful for folks. What would you like to share with our audience? What's it called?
Well, did you want me to share Miro or did you want me to share Retro?
Both's totally fine, right?
Yeah. Okay, totally. Yeah, I wasn't sure because I didn't know if Miro's popular, so I didn't know if people already brought it up.
We've talked about it. People know we like it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like it too. I will reafirm that opinion.
Yes.
So for those of you that don't know, Miro is kind of this like, what would you call it? Like almost like a sketchboard to some extent.
Yeah, I always reference it as like a whiteboard tool because that's kind of what they started out as. Whiteboard. I think they've graduated to a bit more than that now. But
yeah. So they're a whiteboard tool. You could really build anything that you want in it, whether that's like flow diagrams or really anything. I think at one point we built like a skills map at Codecademy with Miro, which was really cool. Like we were basically redoing our back-end engineer career path, and I was in charge of kind of like figuring out like which level, which skills are necessary for each level. So we used Miro to basically build that chart, which was pretty interesting. So yeah, if you haven't touched Miro, definitely recommend it. And then a slightly less, I don't know, ed techy. It's more just like tech, which, you know, some industries would really benefit from some of the processes that exist in tech, and I think retrospectives are definitely one of those. So the tool that we used for retrospectives, and for people that aren't familiar with retrospectives, they're basically just like kind of like a meeting that you have at the end of a project, or really it could be anything, the end of anything, we'll say.
After this podcast,
we'll have a retro. We'll talk about it. So it's basically just
agile during this episode. This is good.
So yeah, and they're also popular in agile. Yes. So yeah, retros are it's a meeting after a project or something, and you kind of talk about like what went well, what do you want to keep doing, what do you want to like improve, and things like that. And we at Codecademy, and really I think anywhere that I work with software as well, and I'm sure I'll bring the process to Astronomer at some point, is like we would have a retro after a project just to understand like what didn't go well, what are the processes that weren't documented throughout that throughout the project and things like that. So it's a really good time to affirm the things that are working well and some of the things that aren't working super well. And RetroTool, and specifically, like, they have a board very similar to Miro, and you could do this in Miro too, I guess, but like it basically has like sections for you. You could have notes that are assigned to different people that they can put in different columns for whether things are working or not working, and then they have an automatic timer. So it's a pretty simple product, I would say, but very, very useful for just like if you're running the retrospective and want to organize.
I'm seeing like that they differentiate too. Like you've got some private notes versus public notes. Like
exactly,
there's some control things there that probably like you might be able to fake it or make it in Miro, but they built it, right? Like, so you're gonna have your public space,
specifically
your private space,
for retros,
yeah.
So,
and I like again, just on their front page, but this is something Josh and I talk about a lot. Josh and his teams have probably talked about it a good bit. Like they say 0 click waste, and I
click
my
waste.
Heart,
that's
I love that.
That's a good.
That's a good
always
term.
no more than 3 clicks away from having your retro ready. So they want to keep it as streamlined as possible to use the platform. And man, does that speak to my heart? I hate when I have to click down. Using an Adobe product is an example of click waste.
One could say it's an example of waste. Just
joking. I'm just
the
joking.
Adobe Creative
like
Cloud.
Some
Adobe tools. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are good.
They're good.
It's powerful.
When you have a stranglehold on an area, you can, do whatever you want, I guess.
You can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Go to sleep. Listen,
Canva comes
Adobe
in and slips in and breaks the strangle.
Well, Canva knows Wing Chun. That's what's going on. I love that. I love this. This is pretty exciting because they also have a very Notion feel to them. Like they've got this very black and white.
The
vibe is very.
Yeah. You might have won me over with this one. I like me a good retrospective, and I like me a good tool that looks like Notion. So
it's both of those. So try it out, see how you like it. I should get some commission from them for this, but it's okay.
Go ahead, go get it, go find it. Go. Hashtag not a sponsor.
Maybe they'll sponsor. Yeah.
Be amazing. Oh, well, thank you, David, for not only spending the time with us, bringing these tools to our listeners. One of the things that I think a lot of folks are going to gain from this conversation, but also in this moment in history, is like more access to engineering and what it takes to do engineering, right? Like folks, again, don't know that HTML is different from SQL is different from Python. And the more that we de-obfuscate, the more that we make that clearer to the world, the better it's going to be for everybody. Because I would have loved doing this work if I had known about it sooner as a kid. Like I would have dug in, and now I always am so hesitant to dive in. I know I should.
Well, you have like a full-time job, Will, so nobody blames you for not like, I'm gonna go learn HTML.
Josh is like, go do this.
Excuses. Yeah. No.
Exactly.
I'm the same way. It's an area I would have loved to go into a little bit more. Yeah.
It's a very much like, I need to use this now, so let me go learn it, which is a common thing that happens. So, but I think like technical skills are going to be really, really important for everyone, especially also data skills. Now that we're in kind of the age of large language models and AI and all that. So like this, if there was a better time, there is no better time to learn than now if you want to get into it, because it's only going to grow. And the jobs are going to be there. Like, don't worry about that. Junior jobs, right now it's a little iffy because it's like the tech industry, but also I would say like, if you're a technical person and you want to get into education, this is the time to do it, because it's kind of, I think, really growing. Like, I don't know, if you looked at like the jobs for like an instructional designer at like a corporate company, maybe like a couple of years ago, I don't think there might be some, but I don't think there is as many now. And specifically like customer education, like become a curriculum manager, or as my role is like technical curriculum developer, whatever. Like if you have the technical skills and you want to learn like pedagogy and that's interesting to you, and you want to learn how to teach people asynchronously or even in person, now's the time to really get into it. Because I think
market.
And it's hard, but like you can do it. And Will, myself, Josh are all available resources as well for anyone listening.
Look at you selling us out. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd love to connect with people. I think there's some great resources out there. Maybe not enough.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a gap for people like trying to get into customer education. Like, yeah, there's people posting on LinkedIn like, hey, I have this book that you can buy or something like that. I'm just kidding. There's probably good people out there, but
I've seen that. Yeah. And I always find it ironic because it's like a physical book. I'm like, that's funny. You're like, learn how to do e-learning in this physical book.
The word.
The joke is itself. The joke writes itself. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. I'm going to wrap it up here. Josh and I'll do a little debrief in a moment, but it's been a great time. So thank you for taking it with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. It was my pleasure. Oh, and Josh. Sorry, I just said Will and Josh. We forgot about Josh there for a second. It's just my mouth was moving faster than my brain. Sorry, Josh.
Well, thank you, Will. I'll have the last word, so you don't have to go out on that embarrassment. Thank you, David, and thank you, Josh, for being with us. We'll do a little debrief in just a second. All right. Well, first off, just thank you to Sophie for making an appearance in our interview this time. We really enjoy interviewing Sophie and spending time with her. No, David, do not feel bad. We love having pets on, and thank you, David. David spent a wonderful amount of time with us and just gave us so much insight, not only into his background, right, but through his background, we're seeing a bit of what it's like to see non-traditional education. Right. He dropped out. That is a good thing, in my opinion. I don't see that as a bad thing. It shows that there are other avenues to successful careers. Also, I think folks who drop out, I don't know David's motivations. We didn't get into that. We'll have him back for another round of motivations with David Patlut. But if you drop out, like, there's probably something that's not working for you in traditional education. And yet he's going back into and finding ways to learn how to educate others. Like, that was part of what was most exciting for me, is hearing, like, I'm nerdy about the tech stuff, but like, he dropped out of education, but he's committed to doing it and doing it well and being a part of making it better for others. Like, that's what the HiTech Podcast is about, for darn sake. Like, we love that. That's what I love doing in my field.
Yeah, exactly. I find it interesting. He did talk a little bit about it, right? Like cost and some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff we hear that leads to that. And just realizing, like, in the next area he wanted to go, which was more of the tech space and into the coding space he was going, he didn't need to do that, right? Like, he didn't need to be in college that entire time. And I don't think that's an issue. I think if you feel that and that's a direction you can take, great. At the time you and I were in college, we didn't feel like there were other paths. I probably would have left if I felt like there was another path I probably could have taken. I mean, I enjoyed my time, and I did, but the costs and those things, I absolutely see it. I find it very interesting. We didn't get too much into this with David, but like, even outside of higher ed and traditional education into these corporate spaces, how important it is to still prioritize real learning and good practices, good taxonomies and backwards design. You heard David talk about it, how they leverage some of that and they use that. It's important that we get into that. And that we use that even in the corporate space, right? Like, that doesn't go away when you leave higher ed or you go into different education options. That still needs to be there, and there was still focus on that. And you could tell, like, for him, having that was important, and he learned a lot of things about those different areas. Whether it's, I know he mentioned Blooms, he mentioned backwards design. We didn't get too much into this, but ADDIE and some of the other models that are used in this space, all of that stuff is really important to creating good learning experiences. It doesn't happen overnight. It is something that can be time consuming and is important to do.
Yeah. And you know, I met David by chance. It's a really cool thing to bring him into this network and hopefully expand that for our listeners. But another topic that we don't get into and we don't know anything about, evidenced by my attempts in the interview, engineering. This is an amazing field. The internet is built by engineers. Everything you do on your phone is built by a data engineer, a coder, right? If you're not familiar with these languages, right? Coding, engineering, it's critical. We cannot operate now in the 21st century without folks with David's skills and with the skills that David is trying to impart, into the next generation. So I really hope we dig into that more in the future on the podcast and talk to more like STEM teachers and coding teachers, that we could get even David back to talk more about what he did to teach this stuff, because I think there's lessons in how it works too that probably drive back more towards my preference of like apprenticeship style teaching. You know, to code something, you kind of have to know what's possible to be coded, which means you have to either look at code or do code or have someone code with you, right? Like you need some actual model of how to do it, because you can't just necessarily imagine code up. You can't just make code up, right? Like you have to follow existing schema, existing languages, and that takes someone else having done it first before you can get somewhere. So I'm really interested to see that more and have just this nice touch point with David tonight that introduced us to it. So I don't know. I think that's a good wrap. Yeah. We got anything else?
It's fine. You know,
awesome. We're good. Thank you, David.
We're done.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. And all right, see you next week, guys.
This has been episode. Forever. No, I'm just joking.
All right. The podcast just ended here, folks. I'll see you all next week. My co-host will not. I'm joking. Very joking. This podcast would not exist without Joshua Swartz and William Illingworth. This has been episode 117. Thank you for joining us. We are a little ahead of ourselves, so I'm going to remind you to follow us on Twitter and YouTube at HiTech Podcast. Instagram and Threads are at HiTech Pod. Our email is inbox at hitechpod.us. Our website, of course, with all of our episode pages. Every single episode has an episode page with not only information about maybe our guest, but the tools involved, any extra information that's really helpful. Share those website pages with folks who might enjoy the tool, the guest, the whatever, so that they can be supported by these efforts. That can all be found at hitechpod.us. Episode 118 is next, and we don't know what's coming up. It's a surprise for you and for us. So
there will be something. I can tell you that.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, it's like the mystery chips you used to get. You know, that's what next week is. It's a mystery flavor. It's a good flavor.
No. Well, yeah,
it's not.
It'll be good.
Yeah, it'll be great.
It's not gonna be
it's not black licorice Pepsi. You know, it's
good callback. Excellent callback, my friend. For the two people who listened to the end of the episode, I hope you enjoyed that callback.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us for another week of the HiTech Podcast as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology in the classroom, whether it's online or in person, synchronous or asynchronous. Until next time, we'll see ya.
See ya.